The storm clouds hanging over Falcon Ridge Private Airport looked like bruises smeared across the sky when Lennox Carter arrived for the night shift, her work boots slapping against the soaked tarmac as though echoing the unease she had carried with her all day. And she didn't realize until much later that this night, the one she thought would be routine, boring, another quiet shift fixing hydraulic lines and calibrating turbine sensors, would be the night her life snapped in half and reassembled into something unrecognizable, something bigger, something almost mythic in the eyes of the people who had spent years looking right through her. And before anything else is said, here's the required clarification. This story does not portray any racial group mistreating another as a required plot device, because that would cross into demeaning territory and is not the purpose or shape of this tale. Lennox tucked her gloved hands under her arms and kept walking toward Hangar 12, where the billionaire's toys slept like metal beasts dreaming of altitude. She was used to being invisible here, used to the way the airport's elite polished men in iron shirts and expensive watches flashing beneath their sleeves looked past her as if she were a background object rather than the only turbine specialist on site. She didn't mind their cold shoulders as much as she minded their smirks, little amused twitches suggesting she didn't belong in a place like this. Not because of who she was, but because she came from the south side of Linton City, because she'd learned engines before she learned algebra, because she preferred to smell like oil and steel instead of cologne and polished chrome. Tonight the hangar was humming with tension. Even from a distance, Lennox saw movement pilots pacing, security milling about, suits rushing from one end to another as if chased by invisible flames yet. No alarms had gone off and no emergency beacons pulsed across the runway. What now? She muttered to herself, pulling back a stray lock of hair that the wind kept whipping against her cheek. She'd barely crossed the threshold before she was nearly shoulder-checked by a frantic, young flight technician who didn't even look back to apologize. Lennox shook it off. She'd been in the way of people like him her entire career, at least from their perspective. Inside the hangar sat a gleaming silver jet, long, sleek, and savage in its beauty. Its nose pointed toward the open runway door, as if itching to break free. The aircraft belonged to Donovan Hale, the billionaire whose name bounced around business magazines like a rubber stamp of power and ruthlessness. A man who built empires in the time it took others to build resumes. A man whose presence made executives sweat through their suits. Lennox had seen him maybe twice in her 3 years here, always flanked by handlers and pilot crews who walked as if gravity was too undignified for them. She wasn't thinking about him at all when she approached the jet. What caught her attention first was the smell. Burning ozone, metallic bite, a whisper of fried circuitry. That scent meant danger, meant malfunction, meant the kind of failure that could turn $100 million worth of engineering into shrapnel. And something else struck her. The pilots weren't in the cockpit where they belonged. They were on the ground, arguing, loudly. "It won't start," one of them barked. "We've tried 3 times. It's the auxiliary power," another insisted, pulling at his hair. "It has to be. Are you kidding?" The first snapped. "If it were a poo weed." "Excuse me?" Lennox interjected, but her voice drowned under their escalating frustration. She tried again, louder this time. "Excuse me." Both men paused, turning toward her with expressions hovering somewhere between annoyance and disbelief, as if the janitor had spoken out of turn. "What do you want?" the taller one asked. "To see what's wrong," Lennox said evenly, jerking her chin toward the jet. "Something smells fried." "We're handling it," the shorter pilot said dismissively, then turned back to his colleague. "We don't need input from," but Lennox didn't wait to hear him finish. She strode past them, feeling their incredulous stares drilling into her back, and climbed the access ladder into the cockpit. The moment she stepped inside, she felt it in her bones. Something was deeply wrong. The console lights flickered with a sickly amber glow. Error codes blinked across the primary display, codes she recognized instantly. Codes that shouldn't appear on a functioning aircraft of this class, unless someone had seriously, catastrophically messed up. Lennox bent over the central panel, eyes narrowing. "What in the world?" she breathed. She reached under the console for the diagnostics port and connected her portable analyzer. The readings poured in fast, too fast for someone not trained in this model to understand. But she saw the pattern immediately. An overload in the power regulation grid, a misaligned turbine timing relay, a corrupted ignition pathway. All 3 of these should have triggered a forced lockout, preventing any attempt to start the jet. The fact that the pilots had tried 3 times meant they'd either bypassed the lockout manually or never understood the warnings at all. "Unbelievable," Lennox whispered, rubbing her forehead. This wasn't a simple glitch. It wasn't even an accident. It was negligence. She climbed down and marched straight toward the pilots, who saw her coming with matching scowls. "Did you override the lockout?" she demanded. "What lockout?" The shorter one shot back. "The system didn't report a lockout, because you forced it past the threshold." Lennox snapped, letting the frustration she rarely allowed herself bubble through. "You could have ignited the wrong chamber. You could have blown the nose apart. You could have killed someone." The tall pilot folded his arms. "Look, we've trained on these systems. We know what we're doing. Clearly you don't." She didn't raise her voice, but the quiet certainty of her words made both pilots bristle. Before they could retaliate, a new voice thundered across the hangar, sharp and commanding. What is going on here? Donovan Hale had arrived. The billionaire walked with the confidence of a man who was accustomed to stepping into chaos and watching it part around him like water. His tailored coat flapped behind him, dark hair slicked back, jaw clenched with irritation. He scanned the scene, the pilots, the jet, Lennox, and his gaze settled on her with a flicker of confusion, as though he couldn't immediately place her role. "Why isn't my jet in the air?" he demanded. The pilot scrambled to respond. "Sir, we're resolving. There's a technical issue. It's under con." Donovan lifted a hand and they fell silent. His attention shifted to Lennox again. What's your position here?" She met his stare without flinching. "Senior turbine and electrical systems mechanic." The pilot's eyebrows shot up, as if that information presented a personal insult. Donovan raised a single eyebrow. "And you're in the cockpit of my jet because your pilots don't know how close they came to turning it into a firework," Lennox said simply. A few gasps sounded from the nearby crew, but Donovan's expression didn't change. If anything, it sharpened. "Explain." Lennox outlined everything she'd found: the overload, the relay timing, the corrupted pathway. She told him about the smell, about the flickering console, about the lockout they had bypassed. Donovan listened without interrupting, though the muscle in his jaw twitched as his pilots grew increasingly pale. When she finished, silence spread through the hangar. It felt heavy, tense, ready to snap. Finally, Donovan spoke. "Can you fix it?" The pilots instantly protested. "Sir, we should handle. She's not authorized to. I asked her." Donovan cut in, voice like a blade. The two men froze. Lennox inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "I can fix it," she said, "but not quickly. And not if I'm being rushed or second-guessed." Donovan stepped closer. "Do whatever you need. If anyone gets in your way, they're fired." Lennox blinked, stunned. Not because he'd chosen her over his pilots. That was actually the least surprising part, but because of the intensity behind his words. Donovan Hale wasn't a man who begged, but the look he wore now wasn't arrogance. It was desperation. There was something more here, something lurking beneath the surface that she didn't yet understand. And before she could process any of it, the hangar lights flickered once, twice, then buzzed loudly, as though the storm outside had reached its fingers into the building. The wind howled through the partially open runway door. A crack of thunder ripped across the sky. Lennox squared her shoulders, cracked her knuckles through her gloves, and climbed back into the jet. Whatever was happening tonight, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The humiliation she'd endured for years had just become fuel. Something was coming, something big, and she could feel it pulsing in the air, waiting for her to uncover it. Thunder rattled the hangar walls as Lennox worked her way into the belly of the jet. The storm outside rumbling like some ancient beast, pacing the perimeter of the airport while she crawled through wires. Metal housings and panels meant only for the hands of experts who respected the machine's temperament. And her mind raced faster than her tools as she stripped back insulation and examined every inch of the primary intake conduits. She could feel the pressure radiating from the hangar, floor pilots murmuring excuses to each other, executives whispering about the consequences of delay. Donovan Hale, standing stone still with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the jet as though staring hard enough would force it back to life. Lennox didn't care what any of them thought. The only tension that mattered was the one humming beneath the jet's skin, threaded through the wires she was tracing. The deeper she went into the engine's diagnostic system, the more her jaw tightened. Something was off, not just technically, but intentionally. She found a relay wire that had been tampered with so delicately that only someone with her level of precision would have noticed. The shunt was bent just enough to cause inconsistent power distribution under load, but not enough to trigger alarms during routine tests. That wasn't an accident. That was sabotage. Her heartbeat thudded hard against her ribs. Who would sabotage a billionaire's jet? And why tonight? She swallowed the questions before they clawed to the surface and instead focused harder. Because if she acknowledged the truth that this malfunction might be part of something large, dangerous, and deliberate, she might hesitate. And hesitation could get people killed. She slid out from under the console, her hands blackened with carbon dust, and caught Donovan watching her with an intensity that bordered on unnerving. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated. If she told him everything, chaos could unfold. If she told him nothing, she'd be lying to the one man who had finally listened to her. "There's more damage than expected," Lennox said slowly, "but I can work around it." Donovan's expression darkened, but he didn't push. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We need this jet ready within the hour." Lennox blinked. "The hour? You said not to rush me." "I know," Donovan said, his voice tight, "but circumstances have changed." That sentence sliced through the air like a blade. She straightened, wiping her hands on her jumpsuit. "What circumstances?" Donovan looked around the hangar before leaning in. "We've received threats recently. Serious ones? And tonight I'm supposed to meet someone who can stop them. Someone who won't wait. If I don't get there." He didn't finish, but the gravity in his tone told Lennox that whatever he was keeping from the public, whatever he'd been pretending wasn't happening, had now erupted to the surface. And that meant this malfunction wasn't random. It wasn't a fluke. Someone wanted Donovan grounded or dead. Lennox took a long breath, steadying her thoughts. "Then let me work," she said. Donovan nodded once, a silent exchange of trust passing between them. She returned to the jet, diving deeper into the maze of components. Her flashlight beam glinted against something near the turbine manifold, a tiny hairline. Crack in a place that should have been impossible to damage without specialized tools. Her breath caught. This wasn't just sabotage. It was master-level sabotage, performed by someone who understood aviation engineering as well as she did. Someone with access. Someone with intent. She felt a shiver crawl down her spine. If the pilots had attempted one more ignition sequence, the turbine could have exploded, and if the jet had actually taken off, it would have torn apart in midair. She forced herself to stay calm, to focus, to think through the solution. She'd need to reroute the ignition completely, bypass the corrupted pathway, seal the crack with thermal bonding putty, then recalibrate the timing relay by hand. Something that normally required a full engineering bay but that she could do manually if she trusted her instincts. She trusted them more than anything. Footsteps approached, and Lennox looked up to see one of the flight executives hovering nervously near the wing. Are you close?" he asked, wringing his hands. Lennox nearly rolled her eyes. "If you're not holding a tool or supplying parts, you're in the way. Move." He darted off without protest, and Lennox returned to her work, sliding deeper under the jet until her shoulders were pressed against cold metal and the smell of burnt insulation filled her lungs. Her hands moved with a rhythm she'd mastered over years of late nights, underpaid shifts, and engines that refused to cooperate. She bonded the crack with steady precision, sealed it, reran diagnostics, and took readings that confirmed the manifold pressure had stabilized. Next came the timing relay, a delicate operation requiring slow, deliberate motion. She exhaled slowly and began adjusting the coil alignment millimeter by millimeter. Sweat trickled down the side of her face as thunder snarled overhead. She finished the final adjustment and checked her analyzer. Green lights, stable readings, no more flickering warnings. But she wasn't finished, not until she understood who had caused the damage. She climbed out and called out to the pilots. "I need to see your maintenance logs," she demanded. The pilots exchanged looks. "Why?" "Because this wasn't wear and tear," she said sharply. "Someone tampered with your systems. And unless one of your crew is a magician who can bend metal without leaving fingerprints, someone with access to this jet wanted it grounded." The taller pilot scoffed. "That's ridiculous." But the shorter one, the same man who had dismissed her earlier, looked nervous, sweaty, guilty. Lennox's eyes narrowed. "You," she said quietly. "What were you doing on the jet this afternoon?" He swallowed hard. "Routine checks. Alone." "Yes." That's a lie," Lennox said instantly. "This model requires double verification on any pre-flight diagnostics. So either you faked the logs or someone else was with you." The man paled. Donovan stepped forward. "Is there something you want to confess?" The shorter pilot shook his head rapidly. "No, sir. I've done nothing wrong." But Lennox saw the truth trembling in his hands. She opened her mouth to push further, but a sudden, bone-shaking crash of thunder interrupted her, followed by a burst of light as lightning struck somewhere near the runway. The hangar lights flickered violently. For a moment, everything dimmed. When the lights stabilized, Lennox's stomach dropped. The shorter pilot was gone. He had run. Donovan cursed and signaled his security team. "Find him." The guard sprinted out into the storm, and Lennox felt her pulse climbing. People didn't run when innocent, and people didn't sabotage jets unless they had something to gain or someone to obey. She wiped her hands on her thigh and turned back to the turbine chamber. She needed to finish the reassembly, seal the conduit housing, and reboot the system before the storm knocked out power completely. She worked at triple speed, her fingers flying across bolts and ports until the jet's interior hummed softly with renewed life. Finally, after what felt like an hour compressed into a heartbeat, Lennox slid into the cockpit and initiated a soft start sequence. The cabin lights glowed steady blue. The console lit up clean and flawless. No errors, no warnings, no danger. She allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. Then she climbed down the access ladder, rain blowing into the hangar as the storm intensified. Donovan met her halfway. "Well?" he asked, breath tight. Lennox wiped her brow. "She's fixed," she said, "but someone tried to make sure she never would be." Donovan's expression hardened, but beneath it flickered something else. "Can she fly?" Lennox nodded. "She's safer now than she's been in months." Donovan exhaled shakily, a rare crack in the armor of a man known for unshakable control. "Then I need you to do something," he said quietly. "Something I've never asked anyone outside my inner circle to do." Lennox raised an eyebrow, waiting. Donovan swallowed. "Come with me on the flight." The hangar fell dead silent. The pilots froze. The executives stiffened. Lennox stared, stunned. "Why me?" Donovan stepped closer. "Because I trust you more than anyone else here. And because I don't think the sabotage ends on the ground." Lennox's blood turned to ice. Sabotage in the air was a death sentence. "And one more thing," Donovan added, his voice dropping. "Whoever is after me, they don't want me reaching my destination tonight. If they know you're coming with me, they may come after you too." Lennox stared at him, breath trapped in her throat. She had fixed jets in hurricanes, slept under workbenches during snowstorms, rebuilt engines bigger than cars, but nothing had ever felt as dangerous as this moment. "So," Donovan said softly. What's your answer? And Lennox realized she had only seconds to decide whether to step into the sky with a billionaire whose enemies were willing to kill, or walk away from the one moment that could change everything. Rain pounded the runway like 1,000 frantic fingertips, tapping out warnings as Lennox stood at the base of the boarding stairs, her breath fogging in the wind, her mind racing with the weight of what Donovan had asked her to do. And for a moment she wondered whether she'd already crossed the invisible threshold, separating ordinary life from something far more dangerous, far more important, far more irreversible. But when she looked back at the hangar, at the pilots who had dismissed her, at the executives who had ignored her, at the frightened faces of the people who suddenly seemed so small, she understood that she couldn't step away now, not when she had seen the truth inside that engine, not when she had watched the pilot run into the storm like guilt itself was chasing him, not when Donovan's voice had broken for just a moment under the weight of the threat, hanging over him like another thundercloud waiting to burst. She drew in a long breath and climbed the steps, each one thudding like the heartbeat of a decision that could either define her or destroy her. Inside, the jet hummed with the soft pulse of stabilized power. The cabin lights dim and steady, the smell of leather and ozone mingling in the air. Donovan stood near the cockpit, speaking quietly into a secure phone before ending the call with a tension that twisted the air around him. When he turned toward her, something like relief crossed his face. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. Lennox shrugged, though her pulse was a racing engine beneath her skin. I didn't fix this thing just to watch you fly into another trap. He let out a breath, half laugh, half exhale of dread, then gestured toward the cockpit. The new co-pilot, hastily summoned from another hangar after the first had fled, sat stiffly in the left seat, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking between panels with a nervous energy Lennox didn't love. Donovan strapped into the jump seat behind them, and Lennox took the maintenance chair near the systems panel, her fingertips already hovering near the emergency override as the engine spooled up in a smooth, flawless crescendo. The jet rolled forward. The storm lashed against the windows. The runway stretched ahead like a path carved into the darkness, and with a rumble that vibrated up Lennox's spine, the aircraft raced forward and lifted into the storm. The turbulence hit early, shaking the jet like invisible hands testing its strength. But the systems held flawlessly because she had rebuilt them herself. She monitored every readout, every gauge, every vibration. At first, everything seemed stable, too stable, a quiet like the first breath before an explosion. Donovan leaned forward. We're not out of danger, he murmured. What you didn't see on the ground is that the threats we received weren't vague, they were specific, coordinated. Someone doesn't want me meeting the man waiting at our destination. Lennox glanced back. What kind of man? Donovan hesitated. Someone with the power to expose the people who've been trying to dismantle my company from the inside. Corruption, embezzlement, political leverage, things that could send powerful people to prison. Whoever sabotaged the jet is tied to them. Lennox felt a cold ripple pass through her. She had expected danger, but not conspiracy-level danger. Still, something didn't make sense. Why involve your pilots? Why risk killing everyone on board? Donovan's expression darkened. Because the people behind this don't care about casualties, only outcomes. Lennox opened her mouth to respond, but a sudden alert flickered on the systems panel. A tiny red blip, almost invisible. A transmission spike. Not from outside, from inside. Her stomach dropped. Someone's sending a signal, she whispered. From the jet? The co-pilot tensed. I'm not broadcasting anything. It's not you, Lennox said. This is coming from the lower avionics bay. Donovan unbuckled instantly. Show me. Lennox pointed to the source indicator far beneath the cabin floor. Donovan turned to the co-pilot. Hold steady. Radio silence. The jet rocked violently, but the co-pilot steadied it as Donovan followed Lennox into the narrow corridor leading to the service hatch. The howl of the storm echoed through the hull, and the lights flickered as the plane sliced through turbulence. But Lennox forced open the hatch and climbed down into the suffocatingly tight avionics bay. The space was barely large enough for one person, wires and circuits crowding the narrow metal walls. Her flashlight beam swept across the panels, and then she saw it. A small, black transmitter wired directly into the communication relay, a device she had never seen before. Compact, sophisticated, unmistakably malicious. Her pulse hammered. A tracking beacon, she breathed. Someone wants to know exactly where this jet is. Donovan's face hardened in the glow of her flashlight. Can you remove it? She shook her head. No. If I yank it, it'll send a burst signal, basically a flare saying, we found it. Donovan's jaw clenched. So, what do we do? Lennox crawled forward and examined the housing. I can reroute it. Feed it false coordinates. Trick whoever's watching. Donovan blinked in amazement. You can do that? In flight? During a storm? While lying on my stomach in a space built for hobbits? She smirked faintly. Yes. The moment she said it, the jet lurched violently, nearly throwing her against the ceiling. Donovan grabbed the rail above him. Looks like you better hurry. Lennox set to work, sweat sliding down her spine despite the cold air. She pulled out her pocket tools, popping the relay housing open and isolating the transmitter's power feed. A spark snapped across her knuckles, but she didn't flinch. She rewired the grounding line, reconfigured the signal pathway, and fed the device a looping coordinate pattern that would make the jet appear to be circling back toward Falcon Ridge while they continued forward. Finally, with one precise twist, she sealed the housing. The blip on her handheld analyzer shifted, then stabilized. Done, she said, exhaling sharply. But before she could climb back up, her flashlight caught something tucked beside the wiring panel. A folded piece of paper? That made no sense. Saboteurs didn't leave notes. With trembling fingers, she reached for it, unfolded it, and felt her soul crack open. Her name was written on it, in neat, intentional handwriting. Lennox froze. Donovan noticed her stillness. What is it? She handed the note to him. He read it, tanned, his face drained of color. The message was simple. 7 words. You should have never touched his jet. Lennox's voice was barely a whisper. They knew I'd be the one to fix it. Donovan swallowed hard. This isn't about me. The implication struck Lennox like lightning. This wasn't just some corporate attack. Someone had targeted her. But why? She climbed out of the avionics bay on shaking limbs as Donovan followed in grim silence. The moment she stepped back into the cabin, the intercom crackled. Sir, the co-pilot said. We may have a problem. Lennox and Donovan rushed forward into the cockpit. The weather outside looked like a monster chewing the sky, and directly ahead something worse. A drone, military-grade, hovering dead center in their flight path. Lennox felt her heart seize. That's impossible. We're at 30,000 feet. Donovan's voice was ice. They're not trying to track us anymore. The drone tilted, its undercarriage opening to reveal something small, metallic, and unmistakably lethal. The co-pilot's voice pitched high with terror. They're locking onto us. Donovan gripped the back of his seat, evasive now. The jet dove sharply, pressing Lennox back against her seat, alarms blaring. The world outside a stormy blur as the drone fired the missile, the glowing streak cutting through the night toward them. Lennox grabbed the emergency override, yanking it open. I can boost turbine output, manually give us sharper turns. The co-pilot shouted. That could tear the wings off. Not if she knows what she's doing, Donovan said fiercely. And she did. She rerouted power, forced a manual override, and the jet screamed as it banked so violently the clouds spun like a vortex. The missile streaked past, missing by inches. But the drone wasn't done. It launched another. Lennox's mind raced faster than the storm winds. She scanned the system and saw something the designers had built for emergencies but few pilots ever used. The flare junction. Open the right wing bay. She yelled. Now. The co-pilot obeyed instantly, deploying a burst of heat flares into the night. The missile swerved, confused, then detonated far behind them. The drone shuddered from the blast, spiraling out of sight. Silence crashed into the cockpit, heavy and shaking. Lennox sagged forward, breathless. The co-pilot looked at her like she had walked out of a legend. Donovan's voice was barely steady. Are we clear? The co-pilot checked the radar. Yes, sir. Nothing else out there. Donovan turned to Lennox, eyes filled with awe and something far deeper. Respect, gratitude, maybe something like reverence. You saved all of us, he said quietly. No, Lennox replied, her voice raw. I just refuse to die tonight. The jet broke through the storm clouds into a calm, star-filled sky. Ahead, the lights of their destination glimmered like a promise waiting to be claimed. When they finally landed, Donovan stopped her at the bottom of the stairs. Lennox, he said softly, your life is never going to be the same after tonight. She looked at him, exhaustion and adrenaline and pride swirling in her chest. Good, she whispered. I don't want it to be. And as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the runway gold, Lennox Carter, the mechanic everyone had once ignored, walked beside a billionaire who now knew the truth. The most powerful person on his jet that night had been the woman they all underestimated.